anyone that's experienced loss in their life, especially someone as significant as your mum, it's tough. My whole teenage life and even younger years, it was indicated to me that you're not amazing at this, you're not amazing at that. My mum was always very much on the other side, like, you're amazing. Courage and delusion a little bit as well, and self-belief, which I think is a quality that everyone needs.
How's it been having business partners who, let's be honest, are quite well known?
To say it's been smooth sailing would be inaccurate and untrue. Maybe I'll have to go on a reality TV show to make that happen, who knows. One that messaged me, which I was supposed to have a conversation with, was Love is Blind. Yes, that one.
Lawrie, welcome to the Inspired By Show.
Thanks for having me, Chloë. It's nice to be here.
How does it feel being sat in that seat? Because for anyone who's listening or watching, you're normally behind the camera helping us film and create this awesome show. So welcome to the actual red chair.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it feels strange being this side, but it's nice to be here. Obviously, I've seen you in action firsthand. I think you're a great interviewer, so I'm intrigued to see what happens.
Cool, thank you. And one of the reasons, for context, I invited you on the show is because you're not just someone that presses record. Every time we record an episode beforehand, you're always like, oh, maybe you should ask this and try this. And I gauged before I even got to know you that you've obviously got experience in the podcast world. So tell us a little bit about your experience in that world and sort of what's got you to being part of Playtime now.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what a lot of people don't understand about me, because they see me behind the cameras, is I actually hate that part of the job. I much prefer being in front of the cameras and talking. So I guess it started through doing interviews with artists. So my background is a sales background. So I was very used to kind of going and meeting with people and understanding them and asking them thought-provoking questions. And then I wanted to kind of pair that experience with music, which is more my passion. So I started off doing the interviews online, and then we transitioned to in-person just after COVID, and that's kind of how it all started. So I guess my ethos when questioning is all around open questions. So who, what, why, where, when, how, and just trying to kind of mask each question to start with one of those words to get the most open-ended answer.
Wow. And so what got you into wanting to interview artists?
Yeah, good question. I think if I'm being totally honest, it's something that I talk about a lot, is obviously the trauma that happened when my mum transitioned, and I think when that happened, I very much felt like I didn't really have anyone to speak to. I didn't really have anyone to give me guidance and stuff like that, and I found the guidance within the music, because obviously rap music is very much like spoken word, so it kind of felt like those people were talking to me, and I got inspiration out of those songs. So that helped me through a tough time, which is where the passion came from. And then I just kind of felt like, why don't I marry that passion with something that I'm good about, which is conversations and questioning people.
Wow. So isn't it amazing how something can happen to us in our life that I'm guessing wasn't unexpected, and it can trigger some uncertainty and we find an outlet. So talk me through your thought process before you found the sort of healing of the trauma, if you will.
It was tough. It was really tough. I think that anyone that's experienced loss in their life, especially someone as significant as your mum, it's tough. So I think there's a period of, whether you want to call it mourning or coping with that loss, and ultimately it's an uncertain time because you're not used to it, especially, so it was 16 years of my life with her, and obviously people have different relationships with their parents, but for me it was a very, very good and strong relationship, and she was constantly there. So that period where it just disperses, it's tough and it's different. So trying to deal with that, I probably dealt with it in the complete wrong way, which again is a good thing, because now I can kind of advise people, do everything that I didn't do and you'll probably be all right. So it's just trying to see the positive of that. But I think to say to you that I had an answer for that period, it would be incorrect and it would be untruthful. I don't think I dealt with it very well. It was tough, but we're here.
Yeah, but that's the point though, isn't it? Most of us don't get given a handbook to go through anything in life, or typically if we do read a book on it, it's not the thing that's going on with us and something else happens.
Exactly.
So we end up finding solutions in our own ways. So what was it about music that pulled you in? You said you felt like they were talking to you, and it was like almost like a talking therapy possibly. Like, talk to me about that concept.
Yeah, so I think exactly that. I think that I'm someone that I've always had a lot of self-belief, and I think that's something that did come from my mum, and just kind of constantly telling me how amazing I am and stuff like that, because I did have periods of uncertainty when I was younger. So I'm like heavily dyslexic, which meant I never did well at school, really badly behaved and stuff like that. So kind of my whole teenage life and even younger years, I was maybe told, or it was indicated to me that you're not amazing at this, you're not amazing at that. But to counteract that, my mum was always very much on the other side, like, you're amazing. And she always told me you're going to shine after school, after education and stuff like that. So I guess that self-belief was always ingrained with me from her. But then when that left, that's when I kind of found the music. And I feel like, dependent on what music you listen to, and rap music specifically, a lot of it is very positive, and a lot of the messages that you're getting are coming from people that have had very underserved backgrounds and deprived backgrounds and poor backgrounds, and ultimately a lot of their messaging is, I came from this, and through hard work, dedication, inspiration, I've managed to get here. And I feel like that was always my goal, was to get somewhere. And I feel like, although my background is not a carbon copy of theirs, there's different pieces that I can take from it and take inspiration from. So I think that blueprint that they kind of speak about was really important to me to try and replicate.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting though how, and I'm very much into rap music as well, but also I totally relate to you can often feel someone's pain and trauma in music, even just by the words and listening to it, but also the beats and the rhythms. That's what I really connect to.
Yeah.
I'm curious because, like you say, it's never ever a carbon copy. So did you say you were 16?
I was 16, yeah.
So did you find anyone at that time that had been through something similar, or have you come across anyone that has been through the similar journey as you have?
Honestly, no.
Really?
But I think that was maybe as a result of not arrogance, but in terms of like, so when she passed, it was like, all right, okay, you can take counselling, you can take this, you can take that. And I was always very much like, no, I don't want it at all. I want to kind of deal with it myself, internalise it. And also I think I had a bit of an issue with, I don't want to be judged or treated differently as a result of something traumatic happening. And I feel like, rightly or wrongly, sometimes when bad things happen to people, they utilize that and they try and benefit off of it, which I personally don't agree with. But at the same time, there's a fine line between ignoring it and utilizing something bad for good. So I think you've got to take motivation from it and stuff like that. But yeah, ultimately, I didn't have anyone that had been through something similar, which didn't help. But I would say that's why I'm more motivated to kind of like talk about it now and utilize my experience to hopefully help others, because unfortunately it's not common, but it's not a unique situation at that age. So even the young people that I work with now, a lot of them have experienced loss, whether that's a mother, a father, a friend, and again, even though the situation might be different, the feelings remain the same.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember I went through a phase of loss. I think I was about 14. I think I'd lost like 11 family members of different connections, you know, like the auntie and uncles that aren't actually blood relatives, but they're older and they're like wiser. And I remember just being quite young and not really understanding what grief was. And I researched a lot of it now that I'm older, and there's various stages of grief depending on what research you have. But there's a stage I always think is missing, because a lot of people say acceptance is the final stage. But actually, I think there's an awareness of looking back, because for a lot of people, they go through grief, they go through the phases, they go through denial, they go through the aggression. We get that. They accept it and they move on with their life. But what you have now done is gone on to almost have an awareness of looking back through it and going, oh, that's why I did that. You know, at what age do you think you kind of got to that level of acceptance or awareness?
Yeah, really good question. I would say 25.
Wow.
A year ago.
Incredible.
Yeah. It took me a long time, but again, this is why when I talk about kind of sharing my experience with others, I feel like the reason it took so long, so nearly 10 years after she passed away, was because the way I dealt with it in the initial stages was wrong. Trying to forget about it, smoking shitloads of weed every single night just to try and essentially numb it. And that, again, just to be transparent with you, that's where the music came in as well. I'd listen to the same 3-4 songs every single night and smoke, and yeah, just try and numb that. But yeah, I feel like I say, just to reiterate, the reason it took so long was because of a poor coping mechanism strategy to begin with, which is why I say to people now is like, it's tough, but I feel like if you can kind of confront your feelings and action them in a more positive way initially, you 3, 4, 5 years down the line is going to be in a much better place than I was. So yeah, I feel like it is really tough to kind of face that from the offset, but it definitely has long-term benefits.
you mentioned obviously it happened at 16. Now,
Mm.
16 is quite a pivotal part of
Yeah,
any young person's life.
Yeah.
Do you think it would have been easier or harder should you have been younger or older, like looking back in hindsight? Now, I just wanted to quickly interrupt this episode to share a quick message with you. Now, I've been hosting these interviews with Inspired by Show for a while now, and I've been loving all of the great feedback from our listeners. And it really means a lot when you all share from listening to these episodes, watching these episodes, share your incredible feedback. And I love that you love it as much as we do. Now, my mission for the Inspired by Show is to inspire others to challenge the norm, share their story, knowing that it's okay to be vulnerable and, shock horror, take the mask off and be raw and real. So I have a favour to ask. Can you help me on this mission by sharing this episode with someone who you think needs to hear this message? Maybe there's a friend, a loved one, a colleague, or someone that you know that would really benefit from hearing this inspiring story. If you could do that to help us, help even more people to challenge the norm and push themselves out of their own comfort zone, then I'd really appreciate it. So if you haven't already, share this episode with a friend, a loved one, a colleague, or someone that you know would benefit. Now, back to the episode.
It's tough. It's so tough because I've got brothers. So my youngest brother, I believe he was 10 at the time. And for me to say it would have been easier if I was in his position, I think is unfair. And I feel like everyone deals with things differently. So to try and say, oh, if I was 10, it would have been easier. Or if I was 18, it would have been easier. I think it's equally as difficult regardless of the age. I just think it's different. So you are right. It is a pivotal time. I think I was just started college. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. But again, like, this is why I have to give props to my mum, because like, even though it was a pivotal time and kind of uncertain and stuff like that, I knew that I was going to do all right. Like, maybe a bit delusional at times, but like, even at college, I did absolutely fuck all at college, to be completely honest with you. Like, played football every day, did nothing, didn't care about my assignments, did a course which had absolutely nothing to do with what I actually wanted to do in life. It was just easy and fun. But I always knew in the back of my mind, like, I don't really care what I do now, because I know somehow I will find a way.
Wow. Isn't it amazing how some people can inspire you at a young age, but you don't realise it until you slightly get older and you're like, that's the belief has come from her.
Yeah, I think so. We talk about a lot at work. It's like planting a seed. And sometimes when you're working with young people, you feel like, am I being heard? Is what I'm saying getting across to this person? But it's hard to judge sometimes until later down the line, and you never know, you might hear from that person in 3 years and they say, what you said to me in 2024, it really resonated. Now, at the time it didn't, but that seed has grown into something, and it's affected me today.
Yeah. So then how did you then decide that you wanted to help other kids go through this? Obviously you're doing a lot of that now with what you've referred to so far. Where did that sort of want to then help other people with it come from?
I think it's like chance, fate, and some of what I was exposed to at a younger age. So my mum was a uni lecturer, but before that she worked with underserved communities in America and various different places across the world. So I was always exposed to that. But also partly chance and also just hard work in certain areas. So it was linked to the music. So obviously I have the platform Discovery Rap. That was born through COVID when I was put on furlough, and I did the interviews and stuff like that. And then when I was doing the interviews and the organisation was doing all right in its infancy, I was like, I want to work with and support an organisation that I believe in. And obviously rap music, it's a majority black genre. So I wanted to give back to someone doing amazing work in the community. So I did a search, I found Mentivity. I was like, all right, this organisation looks cool. All right, perfect. I emailed them. I said, right, I've got an idea. I want to release football jerseys, Discovery football jerseys. I want to put a sponsor on it. And then the sponsor will get the donations from the profits from the shirt sales. Literally emailed Mentivity. Next day, CEO Sace rang me. He was like, I want to have a conversation. Like, let's do it. 2 weeks later, we had the football shirts. We did a shoot. We released them. They sold out like straight away, 60 shirts, donated the money to Mentivity. And that was, I want to say 2020. So like 4 years ago, right? And then 2023, I wouldn't say I was in a rut, but I was in a position, I was still living back home, Chichester, West Sussex. I was kind of like, I want more. Like, I don't want to be in this area. I need more. I need to do certain things. I'm doing stuff in the music industry. Everything happens in London. And I was traveling to London once, twice a week. I was like, I need to move there, but I need some sort of regular income to enable me to live there, because obviously it's expensive. So I was like, let me email Sace and Mentivity. So I emailed him and was like, do you have a job? He was like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I've got a job. I'd never done anything with young people before in my life. I went and met him at a cafe, Caribbean cafe, Blue Jays Cafe in Croydon. Amazing cafe, by the way. We literally had a conversation. He was like, what do you want to do? I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to work 4 days a week. It enables me to work on other things. He was like, yeah, done. 2 weeks later, I was working for Mentivity, commuted from home for, I think, about 3 weeks, and then I moved. So it's, yeah, so I guess it's that pairing of like passion and hard work, and then a bit of chance as well. But I think the like key of that story, and I talk to the young people about it, is like first impressions are so important. If when I did that shirt campaign, I was an arrogant prick, like, and then I reached out 3 years later and said, do you have a job? I probably wouldn't have got a response, or the answer would have been no. So yeah, that's the story. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard that story from you, so that's really inspiring.
Yeah.
And do you know what I think? What you've done there in all those situations, and what I know about you, is you're not afraid to ask. So like, a lot of people would not have had the courage to just get on an email and go, like, can we have a chat? Do you have a job? Or I want to, you know, raise money for you guys. I think a lot of people are sort of sit in their comfort zone. How much do you think courage has played a part in where you are now?
I think hugely. Yeah, I think courage, and probably I mentioned the word earlier, like delusion a little bit as well, and self-belief. I think it's huge. I think it's a quality that everyone needs. I think it is something that is birthed from infancy. And I feel like, again, that kind of leans into why I do what I do today, because I feel like in those early years, a lot of the young people across the UK are not given positive messages, and I think people need to be told how amazing they are. And I think out of that, the courage is kind of born, and I feel like regardless of the industry, the space that you want to go into, courage, self-belief, they're really integral qualities, I would say, to any successful person, in whatever dimension that may be. So yeah, I would say it was important.
Yeah. And you mentioned their delusion. So let's talk about that. You know, obviously you've talked about your own work, in your own words, the delusion of that. Tell me more about it.
I've got to be honest, like, I think it does come from Kanye West. So obviously this is the Inspired By show, so I may as well talk about who inspires me. So yeah, Kanye West is a big inspiration. I feel like he is delusional, but in the right way at times. I just want to put out there that I don't agree with everything that he says, but I do love him. But I feel like that's what's wrong with the world at the moment, is like you can't love or be inspired by someone without agreeing with everything they do, which I think is wrong. But anyway, back to your question. Yeah, I think delusion to me is about having an unwavering self-belief that you can do whatever you want to do. And I feel like if you have that, even when things go wrong, it's like, it affects you, but at the same time, it's like, okay, that's gone wrong. What's next? And pivoting becomes easier rather than just giving up. There's a quote, isn't there? Was it, if you're tired of starting over, stop giving up? And I think that's me. But that can't be kind of confused with pivoting, because changing directions and stuff is different to giving up completely. But obviously, if you're doing something over and over and over again, then maybe you need to change a little bit. But yeah, I think a level of delusion, regulated delusion is important.
That's a great way of doing it, isn't it? Regulated delusion. It's funny you say that though, because obviously I've interviewed some really incredible people. I've worked with some, you know, big celebrities, big millionaires, and like lots of people who have success in whichever way you define it. And one of the things I've noticed about everyone I've spoken to, whether it's on camera, in front of a mic, or like behind the scenes, is the people that get the results are obsessed with the success or the result, whatever that looks like. So it might be they're obsessed with getting the freedom, they're obsessed with fixing a problem, they're obsessed with changing the world, they're obsessed with ending depression, for example. There's an obsession. And how similar do you think that is to the delusion?
That's an interesting question. I think obsession and delusion may be slightly different, but for me, maybe have equal importance, and they work quite well together. I think obsessed people are the best people, because no matter what, they won't stop. But I think it's important to kind of hone in on what you're obsessive about, and it needs to be something that you're passionate about. Otherwise the reasoning behind why you're obsessive about that comes into question. So yeah, I think both important qualities, attributes of people, but yeah, obsession definitely is key. I would say, like you say, to all successful people that I've worked with and I've got in my life.
And do you still have that sort of delusion now, in your words, as to where you're at, what you're working on next, and do you have the obsession for what you're trying to build?
Wow. Okay. So I'd say, yeah, the delusion is absolutely still there. Like some of my eventual goals, my big goals are pretty crazy, but I think they're manageable. Do I have the obsession for the things that I'm working on at the moment? Yes and no. Obviously, I work on I work on quite a few different things. I have the podcast company, obviously, with Charlie and Miles. I work for Mentivity, so in schools. I'm working on some like clothing stuff and do some stuff in the music industry. So there's quite a lot of different things. I told you I'd be totally honest, like the production stuff, so the podcast production stuff, I don't enjoy it. But it's a good business and I can see it doing well, and I'm working with my friends. So it's like, I feel like sometimes just in life in general, maybe you have to do things that you don't 100% enjoy or you're not 100% passionate about, but you can see the benefits of them. So although no, I don't enjoy sitting behind the camera and editing on my laptop and stuff like that, there are elements of the job that I do enjoy. I enjoy meeting people like you. I enjoy working with my friends. I enjoy business in general. And I think that although we're very much in our infancy and mistakes have been made and stuff like that, I feel like there's a good foundation, and I feel like we can build something positive out of it. So obsession about this business, no. Obsession in other areas, yes. So the music stuff, the fashion stuff, the education stuff, art. Yeah, those are kind of areas that I'm more obsessive over.
What's your thoughts when people say things like you can only have one thing? Like, I thought I had a lot of different things, and
Yeah.
obviously knowing you have even more. So what's your thoughts when people say something like that?
I think to a certain degree they're right. I think it depends what your goal is ultimately. So I know Stephen Bartlett often talks about like the reason he's so successful is that he's good at loads of different things. He's not amazing at one thing. He's good at loads of different things, which he says he thinks sets him apart. And then you'll speak to other different people and they'll say, no, you need to hone in on one thing and give everything to that. And then you'll be the category king and this, that and the other. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer, but for me, I'm someone that gets bored very easily. So to focus on one thing, it doesn't make sense for me. So I think there's definitely positives to both. I can see that if you put all your time into one area, then you should become an expert in that area and therefore kind of lead and do well. But for me, it's like the interest of various different things is just how I was born, and that's just my nature. And without sounding arrogant, I'm quite confident that if I put an amount of time into any different area, I can be good in that area. So why not? Why not spread your wings and be diverse?
Yeah, because that's exactly what I was going to say. I see a lot of mixed messages from entrepreneurs, mentors, and say, you must have one thing, you must be great at that. And then when you look at like building wealth, they say, oh, be diverse, don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's like, well, which one is the right one? And I appreciate your honesty, because actually it's about your strengths and what works for you. If you're great at one thing and you want to stick to that, cool. But if you don't enjoy it and you get bored, then you're not going to be great at it for very long.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's all individual, isn't it? I feel like a lot of people give like widespread answers for the population when ultimately like the beauty of the world is that everyone's different. So how can you give like a definitive answer when everyone's nature is completely different? As I say, like I've got friends that just, they work in jobs, they have a decent job, they finish at 5:30, they go home, they play Xbox, they watch TV, have dinner, wake up the next day, and then their weekends are completely free. Like for them, that's great, they're happy. For me, that's not. So there's no right or wrong. It's just what makes you happy, what gives you fulfillment, which is quite important to me. Yeah,
I love that. And when it comes to all the different things you do, like I'm in my head, I'm going, which direction do I want to take this in? Because I feel like I could pick you brains on so many things. But one of the things that I really love about the fact you're sat here is that you're one of the few people we get here that has seen so many episodes of podcasts. You've interviewed people yourself.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you about what you feel makes a good podcast.
Yeah, interesting. I would say guests is very important. Obviously, it depends on the dynamic of the podcast, but guests are important. I would say a very clear goal, objective, niche. So, what are you trying to achieve from that podcast? And I feel like it's such a boring answer, but consistency like is the most important thing. So my podcast, when I had it, Past, Present, Future, we doubled down and we did one interview, I think a week for like 60 something weeks on the trot, and we saw huge growth. And I feel like it's the same with life in general. It's that sense of like delayed gratification. It's like if you are prepared to go hard for 3 years, an episode every single week for 3 years, you're probably going to be in a pretty good place. So yeah, I'd say consistency, defined goal or niche. The host is obviously very important. So I think you're in a great place there. I think you're amazing, as I've already said. What else? Obviously, production is important. So the quality of the clips and stuff like that is of huge importance now, especially with things like TikTok. I would say those are the main things, I would say, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And how do you know, obviously with Playtime, you're not just the editor and the videographer, let's be honest, you're one of the business owners.
Yeah.
And you also select who you work with.
Yeah.
How do you know, like someone comes to you and goes, like, people come to me all the time, who produces your podcast? You know, I recommend it to you. But I'm also a bit like, are they going to get picked by these guys? Because you can't have everyone.
Yeah.
How do you, in your gut, know if someone's going to be a good podcast host or even have a good podcast?
Yeah, again, good question. So I would say it boils down to a little bit leading into the last answer is like, what are you trying to achieve from your podcast? And if it's like, I want to talk about reality TV and I want to talk about should a man pay on the first date? And like, I'm sorry, but there's hundreds of podcasts already doing that. And unless you are an exceptional personality, it's probably not going to do very well. You might have a few TikTok clips go viral and this, that, and the other because you're saying something outrageous. But other than that, there's no longevity there. So I would say it's about defining their goals of the podcast, their view of it, but also that longevity piece. Like, how long are you prepared to produce episodes for before you see a return? And if the answer is, I hope after the first season of 8 episodes we should get some sponsorship, then those are probably not the people we want to work with, because ultimately, like, our initial investment in time and stuff like that, we don't really see a huge return until it gets into the later episodes. So the business model is very much built on longevity of relationships with our clients. So that is why it's obviously of huge importance that we onboard the right clients like you, clients such as Dr. Digital Health, who we work with, and stuff like that, and Amira. So yeah, probably those two things. Are you prepared to do the work, and what is your podcast about? Is it something unique, and is it well delivered?
Interesting, because that's exactly the two things that we do with publishing books.
Yeah.
And with choosing authors, people say to me, well, how do you know if you're going to pick a book to publish? And it's exactly the same thing. I think there's a lot of delusion. We talk about delusion already, but there's a lot of unhealthy delusion in the industries when it comes to building a brand, right? Because authors and podcasters are actually very similar in terms of their driver, significance, status, which, by the way, I'm a podcaster, so I'm happy to say, and I'm an author, so I'm happy to say that, you know, a lot of people do have a want and a need to have that external validation. Yeah. And
I feel like, sorry, on that point, I feel like as long as you're aware of that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I feel like the people that are that way but don't admit it, that's when it becomes bad.
So much.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, as long as you're aware of it and you're honest about it, you know, so like, I'm not afraid to say, yeah, of course I really want us to get more followers 100%. And more listeners and so on, because I can get better guests. And I do love it when people go, oh, you're a great interviewer, or you're a great speaker. Like, I love that. The same when people say, oh, please sign my book, you know. But I think the risk is where people lie about it, and then this is why my pet peeve is people saying, be authentic, you know. What does that even mean anymore? Like, the word has been used so many times now. But I think, like you say, there's so many podcasts out there. There's also so many books out there. So now's the time to be a little bit unique with it. What's your views on being disruptive? Because I think there's a lot of stuff online now going, you must have the most disruptive podcasts to be able to get results.
So I guess I'll look at it a bit more broader in terms of just being disruptive in general. It's funny because I was thinking about this last night. So I tweeted something last night and it was quite outlandish, I guess, in terms of what I was saying. But for me, being disruptive, the other side of that could be you generate enemies or you generate haters or whatever and stuff like that. And for me personally, I actually see that as a very positive thing. So I almost attempt to and convince myself that I have an army of people that fucking hate me and want me to fail. Because if I do that and I disrupt them and they hate me, then I work 10 times harder, because whether they exist or not, if I have a pool of haters in the back of my mind, I'm working harder, which means I'm more likely to succeed. So I feel like, dependent on what sort of person you are, being disruptive can be important, because it can give you that additional motivation. But then on the other side, if those haters do turn out to be real and you're quite sensitive, then obviously that can be negative and that could kind of throw you off your goals. But at the same time, I wouldn't encourage people to be disruptive for no reason. I feel like everything that I do that is with a goal of maybe stirring something is something that I believe, but maybe with an added bit of pepper. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's something that I believe and that I would say to people and that I would stand on, but maybe that additional bit of fragrance to give it that response that you're looking for. So be disruptive, not for no reason, and be calculated about what you're doing. And if someone questions you on it, you have to stand on it.
Yeah, exactly. And nowadays, even if you can delete something, people have still got it, right?
Still there.
So you've got to be able to own what you say and how you feel.
Yeah.
And I see it a lot with our industry, with like people have personal brands. They want to have the clickbait. They want to have I've been on some podcasts, I won't say who, but I've been sat there and I know the questions they're asking, they're trying to get. They're really pulling to get something they think this is going to go viral on TikTok, which, by the way, I'm not slating, because there's a business behind a podcast, there's a business behind a book, but you've also got to create good content, not just great 90-second clips.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like obviously you have to have kind of a direction and certain different points that you want to touch on that people are going to be interested to hear about. Obviously that's important, but I feel like the best clips or the best bits of content that you get are when it's just completely natural. And I feel like even in terms of delivery, your delivery is going to be the most fluent when you're just kind of speaking from the heart and you're saying exactly what comes into your mind at that point in time. So I feel like to kind of have pre-rehearsed answers and if we talk about this, then I'm going to say this and people are going to say this, then it doesn't really work. Try be natural, and I think you'll find off the back of that you'll get some pretty good clips.
Exactly. Yeah. And with that, one of the things that, as I said earlier, I value about having you with us in the team is I'm not afraid to message you and say, Lawrie, I've got this interview. What would you ask? Because I know you've got experience in that. How do you get those ideas for what questions to ask? Let's say you get a good artist in front of you and you're going to interview them. How do you come up with those ideas?
So I do a lot of research to be transparent, but also I think I have quite a unique skill in terms of imagining what their answer is going to be before they've said it, if that makes sense. So when I'm preparing my interview structure, I'll have certain points that I want to go into, and I'll kind of think in my head, so I know about this person's music, I know about this person's background. If I ask this question, what are they likely to answer? And if they answer that, what is likely to be a good place to take the conversation after they answer that? I would say my kind of unique skills are questioning, but also preempting what the answer is going to be before it's come out of their mouth. And obviously you're not going to be 100% accurate at all times, but I have found that I'm quite successful in terms of when I think they're going to say this, it normally happens, which means I normally have a good follow-up topic for that specific answer. And if you're able to map out the journey loosely from start to finish of a conversation, it means it will flow quite well as well. So even though, yes, I want to go into maybe 5 different areas of their life, if you can imagine the direction it's going to go, you can fit those pieces of the puzzle together quite well. So I would say that.
Love that. Yeah. One of the things which I noticed, I didn't realize I did, and I know you do from what I've heard of my research on you, some podcast hosts will have pre-list of questions and then they go through it line by line.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes that I notice they've ignored, let's say you've said something then and I've got a question in my mind thinking I'm going to ask that later, or they'll go, Lawrie, great point, I'm going to touch on that later.
Yes.
For me, I'm like, that breaks the rapport, right? Breaks the flow of the interview. Let the guest guide you as well as the host.
Yeah. It's tough though, isn't it? I think like interviewing is a very underrated skill, and I feel like to be honest with you, if you're a successful or a good interviewer, it's a transferable skill that can be positioned anywhere in life. But I think people do underestimate how hard it is to, in the back of your mind, right, I know that I don't need to, but I want to touch on these points because it's important for the conversation. And even you talked about clips, maybe some good clips are going to come out of it. But my guest has just said that, I want to go into that. And then you lean in on that and then you forget the other thing that's in your mind. It's not easy. And when you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 different questions swimming around in your mind, you can get flustered. So I feel there's a perfect balance between authenticity and questioning off the back of questions and paraphrasing and all this sort of stuff, but also having kind of that structure that you can refer loosely back to. But yeah, it's not easy at all. Until people are sat there and they're doing it and then they go, fuck, like I've forgotten what I was going to say. Like, it's really not easy.
Definitely. It's funny actually because you're describing what I'm going through as we're speaking.
Yeah.
And now my brain's going into, am I doing that? Because that's what you do naturally, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, as I was thinking then, I already knew roughly what I want to ask you. And then I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like reordering it depending on where our conversation goes. So it's kind of like a inception moment of which dream level am I in? Like, am I in a dream, you know?
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to talk about with this is obviously you have been doing lots of your own interviews with artists in the past. You've now got Playtime Productions, which obviously I'm a part of and I've seen and grow, and it's been amazing to interview now all 3 of you on the show, because also we interviewed Mars and Charlie not that long ago, which was great to have all of you on board. How's it been having business partners in such, who let's be honest, are quite well known? How has that been?
It's been interesting. I guess what I would say is they were friends before business partners. Obviously I met them through a work scenario, which I can go into or not, but it's been interesting. To say it's been smooth sailing would be inaccurate and untrue, and those are 2 things that I don't stand for. So it's been hard. It's been really hard, and I think if they were honest, they would say the same thing. I feel like one of the difficulties is that we all have very different schedules. So Miles is here, there and everywhere and doing whatever the fuck he wants to do. And Charlie is very regimented. So they are polar opposites. Miles is do this, that and the other 100 million things at once. And Charlie is, I will wake up at this time, I will go to the gym, I will go to work, I will come back, I will eat food, I will go to bed, and I will repeat tomorrow. So they are polar opposites, and I'm probably somewhere in the middle of them 2. So maybe a bit closer to Miles. So I think the difficulty has been trying to manage different schedules, different personalities, and also coming to the bottom of what our strengths are. So I think mine was quite clear in terms of you're going to head up production and stuff like this, but with them 2, it's been about, okay, like how can we really exploit what you're great at? And it's been a learning process. It's not been easy at all, as you know. But I feel like now we have kind of a good foundation to build upon. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's been fun. It's been hard. Towards the back end of last year, like just before Christmas, like a breakdown might be a bit over the top, but I was close to just being like, fuck this, to be honest with you. Like, I remember I sent a big long message to both of them, and it's quite a lot of swear words in there. I was like, this is bullshit, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's been a journey. I've learned a lot about myself, a lot about them too. But yeah, nothing good comes out of anything easy, right? So hopefully, if we do this conversation in a year, we'll be worth millions and this, that and the other.
Yeah. I always think though, there's 2 different layers to this, because there's starting a business anyway, and then you've got starting a business with 2 other people.
Yeah.
There's relationships between you, because being friendship is different to business partnership, right?
Yeah.
I'm similar. I've got some fantastic friends who we've been in business together for 3 years, and it's been a different dynamic. Same reasons. We've all got different businesses as well. We've all got different personalities, but also you don't want to mess up the friendship. So there's lots of different layers. I remember speaking to you in December, and I could just get the energy from 3 of you, and I was like, I wonder if everything's all right, but only because I've been there, you know. And people say to me, you know, what's the best way to learn about yourself? Start a business.
Yeah.
You know, you think you need to invest in a business mentor. Trust me, you're going to learn so much about yourself. Business development is self-development at the end of the day.
100%.
That's when you find out, you know, am I really into this? And I'm not saying am I good enough? None of that shit. Everybody is strong enough and good enough to run a business if they want to.
That's it.
If they're committed, if they're obsessed. And, you know, it's easier when you're obsessed about something to continue doing it.
Yeah.
But like you said, if you're behind the camera and it's not your favorite thing to do, there's obviously that push and pull.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think also I was allowing quite a lot of what I wasn't in control of to consume me, which is something I've reflected on. And I'm not saying I don't care about certain things in the business now, but there is an element of like, if this happens and it's completely out of my control personally, I can't let that ruin my whole week or my whole day or whatever. I have to, of course, understand it, analyze it, and work out how can we rectify this. But I feel like my issue probably in life in general is I care a lot. Like I care too much, even about things which, like I say, I have no control over or no part in at all. And I feel like last year things were happening and I was just letting it get on top of me, when in actuality, although it's my business, me personally, it had nothing to do with me. And that was really tough because, like I said, I do care a lot about people, about our business, about our friendship. So yeah, but that's, but again, going back to the point of like learning about yourself, that's something that I've reflected on. And it turns out that if that shows up in the business, the likelihood is that shows up throughout my life in general. And I think that's something that I've kind of changed this year, is of course I still care about people and I love people and I'll do what I can, but I'm not going to go above and beyond if it means it's going to have a negative effect on my life and my health, to be honest with you, towards the back end of last year.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, a lot of people wait until it gets to that point where it's too late because your health takes over for whatever reason. Now, I want to talk about, obviously, the people you're in partnership as well with, because Miles and Charlie came on the show not that long ago. Miles was very honest, wants to be the face, loves being the brand. In his own right, in his own way, Dancing on Ice, Made in Chelsea, however many other reality TV shows he's done.
The Courtship.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to kill you for mentioning that. Cool. Charlie was the opposite and said he did Love Island, he's done Made in Chelsea, and actually doesn't want to be involved in reality TV anymore. How has it been for you as the friend and also the business partner with people who are quite public facing? Have you noticed a difference in having people who are involved in reality TV, for example?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, some of it not to the same degree, but has transferred over to me, which has been interesting. It's something that I've never experienced before. I think most of it comes from Miles, as obviously that's his world right now and has been for a long time. But I mean, even the Playtime podcast, I remember I was in the sauna. It was a couple of months ago, and I was talking to one of my friends, and I left and I went on Instagram and clicked on my message request, and there was something like, oh my god, like I just heard your voice in the sauna and I knew you were from Playtime podcast. And I was like, what the fuck is this? I messaged Miles, I was like, how do you deal with this all the time? So yeah, some of it has kind of transferred onto me. Had some shows message me which I think has definitely come from Miles and Charlie, so that's been interesting. But also it's been good to kind of be exposed to some of the positives of that life as well. Like the meals and, do you know what I mean? The benefits of that life. So that's been cool. But yeah, it's just a different world. And I think the empathy comes into it quite a lot in terms of the business, because I feel like, and I've spoke to Miles about this, there'd be times where he'd say, oh, I'm busy and I can't do this for the business. And I'll be honest, I'd be sat there thinking, Miles, you're not fucking busy. I've got a job. I've got a full-time job. I do the editing the weekends. I do the filming. I'm working all evenings. You go and you sit in front of a camera for 45 minutes and then go and get your hair done and go to the gym and the spa. Like, you're not fucking busy. Like, just do it. But in reality, that's not true. It's very different. He does work super hard, and even in terms of doing the studio, that's something that me and him mainly did together, and he's always up for doing things regardless of the day, regardless of the hour. So I spoke about on one of the podcasts, I think that we need to kind of look at job empathy across the board. And I feel like a lot of people always want the narrative of, oh, I work the hardest, and oh, I work in a garage, I do manual labor. So you who works in an office, you don't do anything, you just sit there and type all day and stuff like this. And it's like, hard work can be diverse. It doesn't just have to be manual labor. It doesn't just have to be working in an office or a hospital or whatever it is. Everyone works hard, just in different ways. And I feel like that's something that I've kind of grown to understand through working with both of them.
Yeah. Do you know what, though? It's really interesting. You mentioned empathy, because I think it's so easy. The empathy is needed because most people compare to each other, especially when shit hits the fan. And I don't mean like a complaint or a refund request or a big thing. I'm talking about when you're stressed, when you're tired. It's like, well, hang on. you can't do this. Like you said, you can't do this, but I'm working this. And it becomes like, we don't really know what's going on in people's worlds.
Yeah.
And it's like peaks and troughs, right? Like Miles on Dancing on Ice. And we joked, I was like, I don't really think we've seen him in a little while because he's been on Dancing on Ice. But fair, I think, to say that Playtime Productions and the Playtime podcast has grown as a result of his visibility.
Absolutely. Like, it would be naive to say that he is not the biggest driving force in terms of exposure for the business. Like, absolutely. He's a huge personality, amazing person, and he generates a lot of interest into the business, which is obviously great. So if he can kind of focus on that area and we focus on others, I think we're going to have a successful business. But I think it is also tough, though, because there's a fine line between, I love Miles, he's like one of my best friends. So when his role is to generate interest and eyes, you don't want him to feel like he's being exploited. And I feel like that is something that you have to tread very carefully around. But we've had those conversations, and ultimately, like, if the business failed tomorrow, like, I would care, but ultimately he's still my friend. You know what I mean? I care more about him than I do about the business. So yes, I would say that is maybe the danger, but you just have to kind of have that conversation and say, look, this is your role. This is how we see you. You're amazing at this, and we value you for it very much.
Yeah. And you mentioned obviously him being the driving sort of force behind it getting interest.
Yeah.
What would need to happen for all three of you to be so visible? I know now Playtime's recently changed, so you have a mic and you can share way more. But is that what you would love to have, like all three of you, and actually equally being as visible as each other?
Yeah, I think that would be cool. Obviously, I have ambitions to do certain things which would make my position in terms of like exposure more relevant. I think that would be cool. There is something to be said about how the podcast is going to transition, because we've not been filming it since Miles has been on Dancing on Ice. So I won't say too much about that, but that's like a conversation that needs to be had about what the podcast looks like when we come out the other side. But yeah, I would very much like to be kind of in front of the camera, because I've not done as much stuff in the music industry recently. I did the documentary last year, but in terms of my front of camera time, it has gone down probably over recent months. So it's something, I'm keen to do. And I think Miles is keen to do it as well. So it's a conversation that needs to be had. But yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll have to go on a reality TV show to make that happen. Who knows?
Oh, maybe. Which one would you go on if you could pick?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, like, Love Island is great because the exposure is so huge, but I don't think it's very interesting. I kind of like the more intellectual ones. One that messaged me, which I was supposed to have a conversation with, was what's it called? Love at First Sight? No, Love is Blind. Love is Blind. Love is Blind. Yes, that one. They're coming to the UK, and yeah, maybe. I think that one's quite interesting. Married at First Sight messaged as well, but that doesn't interest me. Love is Blind, I think, is quite interesting. The whole concept of getting to know someone before you see them. And I'll be honest, if I ever did go on that, I would be very skeptical about it. So just to kind of see if there is anything in that, I think that would be interesting. But yeah, I think it'd be a combination of the exposure and the reward for going on. It would have to be right, but also it'd have to be something quite interesting. I think Love Island is a bit too mainstream and boring and basic for me.
Yeah. I literally had this conversation with my friend not that long ago. What about something to do with your business? Would you ever do like The Apprentice or anything like that?
Yes. Yeah, I would. Although I haven't watched it recently, so I can't comment. But when I did watch it in the past and historically, I feel like the majority of them are just fucking idiots. And I wouldn't want to go on something to be shown in a negative light. So it would have to be for the right reasons, and I'd have to be kind of assured, like, no, this is like a serious program. Do you know what I mean? Like, but yeah, most of them are just fucking idiots with no common sense. And what's that clip where the woman, she wants to set up the website and she's doing the interview with the bloke, and she's like, yeah, so my website's going to be called this. And he's like, I presume you've got the domain for that. And she's like, no. And he's like, I've bought all the domains for your website. so you're fucked, basically.
Yeah.
Like, they're all idiots.
It is, and I totally agree. And that's the thing, because me and my friends have talked about this recently, especially after we interviewed Harvey Armstrong, obviously known from Made in Chelsea, but Primetime Lager, and you were here when we interviewed him. Really cool episode. And one of the things which came out of that was he was saying that Primetime massively grew through his reality TV experience, to the point where he got it tattooed on his arm to make sure that it could be seen. And so a couple of my team members said, well, Chloë, why don't you go on reality TV and it'll help us grow the brand? I thought, well, I'm now engaged, so Love Island is probably off the cards. Maybe 5% chance, but pretty sure it's off the cards. You know, and anything romantic based. So we talked about The Apprentice, and one of the things that I find is it's just, I don't think I could do it, because I think a lot of them, no offense, don't actually know anything about business, which is why it's good TV. Whereas when you've been in business as long as we have, it's like, oh, I don't think I could be managed or led by idiots. I don't think I can keep my mouth shut. I really do.
Just to be clear, I'm not like a business guru. I'm not like an amazing business person, just to be very, very clear, all right? But I have some common sense. That was more what I was getting at. But I think you would do great on The Apprentice, actually. Yeah, I can see it. I can see it now. You're getting out that cab, the Mercedes Sprinter, and chatting shit to some people. Yeah, it would work well. I think The Apprentice would be good, actually.
Well, you know, if they're interested, let's make it happen. Let's have a chat. Cool. And Lawrie, obviously, you've been on the show behind the scenes many, many times, so you kind of know how this bit works. But we always like to end any episode looking at your inspiring journey and who's inspired you on the journey. So today we've been inspired by you. Who has inspired you on your own journey?
Loads of people. I have to obviously say a big shout out to my mum, my dad, the obvious people, but I mentioned them earlier. I'm gonna say Kanye West. Kanye West, huge inspiration. I have to be clear that I don't agree with everything that he says, the majority of it, probably not. But what I do respect about him is that he says what is on his mind and he owns that, which I think is really important. I also think, like, artistically, sonically, he's incredible. Arguably one of the most talented people of our generation. And I feel like if you strip back the layers of delusion and outlandish comments, ultimately he has a great heart and he wants to do things right for humanity. So I think Kanye West has been one of my biggest inspirations. But yeah, I just love the kind of like unapologetic nature of his being, whilst obviously saying that, yeah, I don't agree with everything that he says, but yeah, I like the way that he delivers without questioning himself. And again, to kind of go into what I was saying earlier, he absolutely is delusional and has an unwavering sense of self-belief, which I feel like you can't really not admire. How can you not respect and appreciate someone that, regardless of what anyone else in the world is saying, believes that they're going to be the best in any industry? That's another thing that I like about him, is he's diverse across industries. Obviously fashion, music, maybe politics, who knows? So he is very much someone that kind of spreads their talents across industries.
I think it's a really good point, though. I mean, he is delusional, let's be honest. He's on the extreme case of that.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think actually anyone that is doing something that's a bit out there, and I mean, out there could be starting a business, could be starting a podcast, could be writing a book. There will be someone you come across that'll think you're delusional. It's always, I mean, when I wrote my first book, I think all my family thought it was crazy. When I started my first business, everyone was like, what are you doing? When we did the podcast, it's like, who do you think you are? There were people out there. And so actually that's how it's a good sign to know that you're doing the right thing, right? So
100%.
I think sometimes we can take a sprinkle of people, like the delusion. I'll have a little bit of his delusion, probably not a lot more. I like his music, I'll give you that. But take a little bit of people's delusion and use it to fuel yourself, which is what you've done. So love that suggestion.
Thank you.
And you know, as part of the show, our final question is always looking at who you know. So question for you, who do you know that has an inspiring story that we should have on the show next?
You know what? I would say the best interview I ever did, or I ever have done, was with an artist called Deyah. Incredible artist, now a mother as well, recently a mother, and she's a huge mental health advocate, and I think she had a few very interesting things happening in her life recently as well, in terms of, I think, her management in some way fucked her over. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but long story short, incredible artist, incredible person. Like I say, the interview was amazing, and I think that, yeah, if she'll come in, it would be a great conversation. So I'd say Deyah. Yeah, that would be my one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lawrie. Well, let's make that happen.
Yes, absolutely.
Appreciate you coming on the show, even if you are already in the studio.
All good.
But actually getting on camera and sharing so openly, I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. As I said, I think you're great at what you do. I think the podcast is on a really positive trajectory, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, guys, I hope you have enjoyed that episode as much as I have. And as Lawrie said, we are still up and coming. We've been in the podcast studio now. I think we've been doing podcasts for nearly a year as I'm recording this episode with you. So yeah, it's definitely on the up and coming. And to keep that positive trajectory going, please do support us. Make sure if you haven't already that you have followed and subscribed to the show so you don't miss out on our next few episodes. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, make sure you share in the comments what has been your biggest takeaway from this episode. Make sure you really take in this inspiration and do something with it, because ultimately that's what will get you the results. Cannot wait to see you next week.